No, no, there we go.
Yes.
We're live. Can you tell
Hello.
we're live?
We are now live, it says, yes.
Fantastic. Hello, hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you for the inaugural first Soul Speak conversation with the amazing spiritual tutor, Crystal. And how do you pronounce your last name? I don't want to get it.
Duan.
Crystal Duan, the spiritual teacher. And today, our discussion is going to be around Myers-Briggs. Is it type indicator? Is that what MBTI stands for?
Yes, it's actually about the psychic system that inspired the Myers-Briggs type indicator. So we're going to be talking about, like the 16 personalities, but in the context of they're more spiritual origins, is what I believe. So yes.
Fantastic. So the psychic functions and two orientations as pioneered by Carl Jung that can help us better understand ourselves and others. And because of the climate of the world right now, we are also going to talk a little bit about how we can use this understanding in relation to sort of what's confronting us. And we'll dive into that. Crystal will also go over how we can use tarot and our mode of higher self through reflection and journaling about our issues and discover insight into our true unique gifts.
Yes.
As well as discuss how us mamas and women's in all stages of our life, how we can find a supportive community and also create a routine to support ourselves emotionally when we're going through rough times. Fantastic.
Yep, so that is completely accurate. Yes.
Fantastic. So do you want to go ahead and share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure.
How you happened to land into becoming a spiritual tutor?
Yeah, so my name's Crystal, and I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and now I live in Los Angeles, but I spent college in the Midwest. So I went to school at Mizzou, University of Missouri, and I also have lived in North Dakota, Indiana, Minnesota, DC, and I live here. So I guess I spent a lot of time traveling, and I really got into spirituality because I went to journalism school, and I was very interested in just how people seem to experience reality completely differently, which is why we have a lot of political strife, which is why we have just a lot of just conflicts in our interpersonal relationships. People are just living in different planes. And through journalism, I really began to explore this through like all my reporting. I've done education reporting. I've done city like beats with like covering city council. I've done features. I've done a lot of political reporting and a lot of cultural, like just features and observations. And I guess you could say that the psychic system that inspired Myers-Briggs, as pioneered by Carl Jung, that really came into play when I was a sophomore in college, which is funny because with the current climate, it's actually kind of relevant to my own hero's journey because so the protests in Ferguson after the shooting of Michael Brown, that was an hour from my campus. So we really had to reckon with what racism really was at that time. And for me, I am a Chinese American. My parents immigrated from China. But at the time in Missouri, it was mostly Black folks and white folks at my school. So I was kind of in the middle, kind of observing everything, and felt sort of like I didn't really resonate with having really any skin in the game in the exact way where it was like, like two people or two races kind of having this dialogue. So for me, I took it upon myself to really explore another way of looking at why people have these conflicts. And then I eventually had the conviction that this is the main way to look at it. Like spirituality really became a way for me to interpret what was going on and also bring not just comfort, but peace to people innerly so then they can take action to fight for the peace externally is
Beautiful.
Really what I'm about here. Like I really do not think that being spiritual should make you complacent. It should give you enough hope and have a fire under your ass so you can then ask better questions, be more curious, and thanks to these psychological type systems I've learned about, I really began to be able to organize and really comprehensively understand why people are sometimes just living a different world. So
Yeah.
that was really, I guess how I want to explain how I do things. Because tarot cards and learning astrology and learning these systems was all for the motivation of better understanding everyone's hero's journey so that we can collectively
Mm.
impact our hero's journey as a whole.
Beautiful. I love that. The hero's journey, that we each all have our own story. We all have a hero's story. And that
Yes.
by accessing different parts of spirituality, different tools, different modalities, we can learn more about ourselves and others, how to relate better and expand and grow, right? Not being
Yeah.
so rigid in our thinking and thoughts. And so
Yeah,
you
very much
mentioned
so.
you were at school with the riots in Ferguson and that, and I happen to remember when I was in school in Portland. This is going to date me, but this was
It's
back
funny.
when it was the Rodney King riots,
Mm.
and just feeling so alone, so isolated and scared. And quite honestly, being young back then in my 20s, I had no clue what to do about it.
Mhm.
And just sort
Yeah.
of hearing the people outside and also witnessing it on the news, just going, oh my God, this is horrible. And
Mhm.
really the only refrain of, can't we all just get along, was sort of,
Mhm.
yeah, the understory. And
Yeah,
then of course,
totally.
now today.
Which is funny because Saturn is an Aquarius again, just as it was during the Rodney King riots. So it's actually come back during this time. So it's kind of funny that, like, by coincidence, you're talking about the Rodney King riots. We're talking
Right.
today about, like, these current riots. And it's like, oh, well, funny how there's a planet out there kind of influencing this stuff again. So I find that just very interesting timing and such. But yeah, like, I do think that these are very important tools because my ideology is that when you give people hope, they naturally start to do the right ways to align with the collective. Priorities begin to align together, because I think that the way that the world works is based on your psychic type and also based on how you've been socialized. Your priorities on how to live a good life or how to correctly deal with situations or how to correctly even see what's going on is going to just have a different stacking and priority compared to other people. So that's why everyone just wants, to get along and have a good life. But the interpretation for how we're going to get there, what needs to be done first, what needs to be thought about, what needs to be, like, all these things, people just are completely on different pages at all times. Even people within the same movement on the same side may have totally different priorities that eventually show up when you start to argue over what is the right mode of action toward XYZ. And I saw a lot of that, because not just the protests in Ferguson, but also the following year, there were on-campus protests because there were students who were in charge. Like, our student body president, who was Black, was getting racial death threats thrown at him.
Wow.
And he wanted the administration to do something. And they were a little passive. Not a little, they were very passive. And so a lot of people were like, that's not okay. And, there were protests where people wanted the administration to resign, take action. There were, like, it was very interesting because, as a young person, your own fellow students protesting on the campus and being very scared as to what could escalate and such. I just remember, like, feeling that kind of tension, especially because as journalism students, we have to stay objective, but we were like, we're like scared for our friends, and like we just have to. It was like a very interesting position to be in when you're like in your early 20s, and you shouldn't have to deal with this, like, it's just like,
Right.
oh, like, we can't go crying for an adult to fix things now because we really have to just grow up fast. And so when I think about this psychic system, which I'll actually start to explain in a sec, I really do think about how it gave me the ability to not necessarily excuse behaviors, but it gave me the ability to empathize with their root causes and then find a way to ask the right questions to get to where action can be taken, where everyone can be met where they're at and bolstered up to be able to do what they need to. And I've taken this ideology all around the country in various capacities. And so I'm really, I guess, proud of what I've learned from just living so many different experiences in so many different parts of the country. Because the Midwest, East Coast, West Coast, everything's very different across the board. So yeah.
And I think that is the most critical that I want to share with everyone, right? Is that the reason why we're having this conversation is so that we can step into a level of understanding of ourselves and each other, right? To be able to access different tools in order to expand that, even if we are scared and terrified, and get to a place of understanding. It may not necessarily we agree, right, with what someone may say or do, but have some sort of empathy. So you were going to, you mentioned sort of backtracking and doing a little sort of foundational stuff. Do you think that would be appropriate to do now?
Yeah, of course, totally. So, and then once I explain it, I can apply it and go back to like some of the other things I was talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
So first of all, there are 4 functions to our personality. So stop thinking about the 4 letters for a sec with Myers-Briggs. Let's talk about just the 4 functions. So there are 2 for perceiving, 2 for judging. The 2 perceiving are sensing and intuition. The 2 for judging are thinking and feeling. Mm-hmm. And so like in Myers-Briggs, it's like you're a sensor or intuitive or thinker or feeler. That is something people know. And there's also separately 2 orientations for these functions to be in. There's extroversion and introversion. Little do people realize that Carl Jung's actually the reason why we say the words extrovert or introvert in our society today. Like when people are like, oh, I'm like a huge introvert, that word came from Carl Jung talking about this. So basically, therefore...
Sorry, I just want to try to reiterate. So there are 4 main ways of perceiving and judging, right? So in judging, it's
thinking and feeling.
Thinking and feeling. I'm going to type this in the chat, which is why thinking and feeling. And then the other one is sensing and feeling.
Intuition.
Or intuition. Sensing.
Yes. So think about your thoughts and your feelings. Those are assessments, judgments. And then sensing is kind of like, I can see this table. Intuition is like, this table meant so much to me because my grandma gave it to me. That's like intuition.
Right.
So it's like the meaning. So
and then the other piece of being extroverted and introverted, how did you describe that again? As the orientation?
Yes, it's the orientations, and each of these 4 has an orientation. So just as you have extroverted thinking, you'll have introverted thinking. You'll have extroverted feeling, introverted feeling. You'll have extroverted sensing and introverted sensing, and you'll have extroverted intuition and introverted intuition.
Perfect.
So, and then when you put them all together, it's 8 total. So now that you know that there are 8, 4 extroverted, 4 introverted, now we also have to talk about the fact that humans only usually use consciously 4 at a time, like in their default psyche stack. So you will, like, basically all 8 can be represented among the human populations, but most people people will only use 4 at a time. So they'll use 1 sensing, 1 intuition, 1 thinking, 1 feeling. That is definitely what they have to have. But there will only be 2 introverted ones and 2 extroverted ones. So for example, like I'm an ENFP, so I, use intuition, feeling, sensing, thinking, but my intuition is extroverted and my sensing is introverted and my feeling is introverted and my thinking is extroverted. Now someone else walking around the street actually has what is called my shadow because they have all the functions I don't. So for example, an INFJ is opposite me. While I have extroverted intuition, the INFJ has introverted intuition. While I have introverted feeling, the INFJ has extroverted feeling. While I have extroverted thinking, they have introverted thinking. And while I have introverted sensing, they have extroverted sensing. So basically, when I meet an INFJ, like I can be like, wow, we both care about intuition and feeling, but we use it in opposite ways. So this can be kind of where we clash sometimes, where my feelings are introverted, I want to retreat. Their feelings are extroverted, they want to express. And if I want to express my thoughts, they're keeping their thoughts to themselves. And maybe I want to be blah, 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 all the meaning of life, but they want to be more private about that. So you see, it's like it creates all these kinds of strange ripple effects. So that's only 2 of the 16 types. Now the rest of the 16 types also have this kind of weird meet your match dudes, like the shadow thing, where you see someone, you think you're similar, you're actually not, and all this stuff.
Okay, so I am an INFJ, I think. Let me look at it again. I have it written down. I did want to ask, can our types change over time?
So I don't believe our types change. I believe that it's like your starting pack. And then over time, I think that you might test differently depending on which of the starting pack you've been growing. So for example, I am an ENFP, so those functions I just told you, the intuition, like that is my default. But I've been growing a lot, so I no longer test as an ENFP. People like basically my test result often reflects that I'm an ENTJ or ENTP because I've been working on my thinking function. It's not my strongest though because my top are actually intuition and feeling.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
Yeah, so basically like it just really depends because I think people like what I try to tell people is I don't really subscribe to testing. I think that you have to learn about the theory and figure out what order you use your functions in and what like type you are from there. Because for example, there are people who like, you know, might test as like an ENFP, but they're actually like using introverted thinking, which is the default stack of an ENTP. But if they've been developing their feelings, which are extroverted feelings, they'll seem more like a feeler, but they won't be like me because we use feelings completely opposite. So that's like an example of how it works.
Okay.
And so people are like, whoa, that's like really confusing. So, and like
it is on one hand, but then I also appreciate it because I recognize that depending on my role, right? If I look over my experience, I flexed those areas differently. And because of work I've done on myself, right, have been able to then grow in those areas, you know, like being an introvert, it's like, oh, heaven forbid, don't put me in front of a camera. But then I can get into that space and be so extroverted in my manner.
You need to be, yes. Exactly, yes.
Okay, so we do have a question. Or a comment. Beth says, best explanation of whether we change or whether test results change that I have heard. Fantastic.
Yeah, yay. So actually, I want to really center this discussion on the fact that something I really care about is that we don't pigeonhole ourselves into like, you know, like these types. So I think that what is really important and maybe not emphasized in, say, the Myers-Briggs learning community is that we can work on all 8 of these functions. And so I think that sometimes people, they're a little confused about what type am I? And they really just want like, you know, kind of a map to learning to improve yourself. Because like, you know, if you are an ESTJ, you'll learn how to like improve your relationships like an ESTJ, but if you don't know what you are, it might be confusing and overwhelming. But what I want to tell people is that what I've learned was the most immediate application of this was the fact that I knew now that people can experience reality a completely different way than me. So because of that itself, it makes me motivated to ask better questions to when I'm getting like upset at someone, stop and be like, there might be more to the story because knowing that there are people in this world who are representing my shadow or are just really different from me, I may not be making correct assumptions about what they're actually experiencing right now.
That is giving me chills. That is such a beautiful point, especially right now, right, is recognizing that how I view, respond, interpret, understand things can be the complete opposite of someone else. But recognizing that can allow me to be more open and empathetic.
Yes, exactly. Beautiful. So just purely that hypothesis that isn't concrete, and so it's very hard sometimes, I think, but just the idea that things can be completely different than what you expect I think it can sometimes give anxiety because then you're like, oh, I assumed everyone was just this way and I have to reinvent that. I think it can also make you realize that you have the power through asking questions, through guess and checking if your reality is correct, to get to the correct point and stuff. Now, I'm keeping in mind, though, that with the current racial climate, the emotional energy to do this, especially on the parts, I think, of Black people, it might not be there. But I think that for a lot of us as a collective, when we do have that emotional energy, we should always be basically like stocking up. Like if you're like kind of annoyed at someone, guess and check and ask and check in if you're getting it right. If you're furious, of course you might not have the, restraint emotionally at that point. You might be so exhausted you can't. But I think that in the liminal moments when you don't feel so exhausted, you can work on this and just have the curiosity. And I think that above all is what I really want to impart to people, especially these like women who honestly, like on all stages of life, we kind of, I think society puts it on us to be like caretakers, sometimes unfairly so. It makes us really tired. But I think that when you can figure out ways to better interact with the other fellow caregivers in your community or in your life, or just like kind of have this kind of bottom line idea that there's more to the story, it can become almost more fun to go through life as well. So I think that I just really want this tool even existing to give people hope above all, to always keep asking and making sure that when you have this kind of resignation to just reality sucking, that when you realize that there's more to it, these functions can give you the building blocks to building a better story.
Love it. So I'm sitting here wondering if you could explain a little bit how like extroverted versus introverted thinking would look like, how extroverted feeling versus introverted feeling would look like, as when we're interacting with people, and vice versa with sensing and intuition.
Totally. I can give a little bit of a crash course. Now, again, I'm sorry for the viewers who are like, whoa, this is very complex. We can take years talking about this, but I'll try to give a brief overview. So let's start with extroverted thinking. The thing is, it actually pairs by default with introverted feeling. So every person who's using extroverted thinking consciously also uses introverted feeling. Now, extroverted thinking and introverted feeling, they tend to be about goals. They tend to be about like objectives logically. They tend to be very aware of like other people's thoughts, which also feed into emotions. Now realize emotions and thoughts do go hand in hand for both of the pairs. But for extroverted thinking specifically, it comes down to you're very aware on some level, like of how things personally impact you because you have this introverted feeling. You can keep track of the emotional events that were very significant to you and the people in your life that were extremely significant to you. You can like not talk to someone for years and still feel this deep fondness for them. You can not think about things for you, but like you just really have an understanding of what feelings have connected together to linearly create how you got to where you are today.
Okay. On the other hand, so they're goal oriented. They're aware of their own feelings and how that impacts them. Okay.
Yes. And so when you empathize with other people, you tend to look at the facts that have created the feelings.
My bad. Sorry. I accidentally started the recording of the Facebook when I was trying to add a comment. So go on.
Okay. So what I was going to say was that with the way that extroverted thinking and introverted feeling displays empathy is they look at the facts of life that are like surrounding your existence and surrounding what can be creating your emotional response. Like, for example, it's like, I am just really sad that it seems like I've seen this pattern of people acting this way toward me, such as ignoring me when I get to be too complex for them. And so that creates this deep feeling that I am just like unworthy. And so it creates this linear kind of deep set emotion that can be triggered very easily, for me at least, when I see even a hint of someone doing something like rude like that to me. Because I'm very aware of my emotions can exist in a vacuum. I do not need to know what other people are feeling to feel independently on my own. And that is by default what extroverted thinking and introverted feeling tends to emphasize. Okay. Now, let's talk about the opposite.
That feeling, is it empathetic, or is it, you know, being able to understand the feeling of others, or is it mainly focused on yourself and inner feeling?
Well, it's actually both, because when you understand your feelings really intricately, you understand the whole system of how feelings kinds of works, and you can also understand when other people are experiencing something deep. Like, it's like when someone's dog dies, I will feel the same pain as if my dog died more easily, because I can see the fact of a dog dying and understand all the intricacies to how people are attached to dogs, which is very different than, say, like if your grandma dies. That is also something I can think about, oh, how my grandma dies, but that's actually a totally different sort of emotional system to what kinds of like it's like just kind of different sorts of realms. But basically, it enables people to be empathetic by looking at the facts and understanding them very deeply. And this tends to be people who are FPs and TJs. That is who, and TJs. So ENFPs,
feeling and
INFPs.
Perceiving. TJs is thinking and judging.
Yeah.
Right?
Because TJ is extroverted judging and FP is introverted feeling.
Gotcha. Okay. So we've talked about extroverted thinking and introverted feeling. So what about introverted thinking, extroverted feeling?
Yay,
which could be me, right? Because I am an IN.
Yeah, it could be you. Yeah, if you are testing as an INFJ, you also might, have tested as something else, like either way. But we talk about this too. So basically, someone with extroverted feeling, they're very focused on sort of like, so extroverted thinking, it stands for like TE is what my abbreviation is. It tends to be about goals, like logically. It's about, let's get these objectives done. Like a lot of companies use TE to basically map out their goals, but even stuff like, I want to get this XYZ job, that's like a goal. Mm-hmm. Now, an extroverted feeler is more like, I want to feel XYZ way. And they're not as attached to having a certain goal as to what they're going to literally do. They more so have what is more so like a strict ideology of, I'm going to treat people this way regardless of what I feel, to where they can even tune out how they feel sometimes in favor of understanding the collective. So I think that what I like to frame it as is an extroverted feeler will always make sure that they're serving and doing, and they always have an idea of what they can do without needing to reflect on what their personal feeling is. They will just kind of logically understand and click what is going on like already. And so with extroverted feeling, it tends to be like, sometimes if you're so caught up in what other people feel, you don't even like pay attention to what you feel, but you always kind of know like what your logical convictions are. Like you understand like, oh, like when like if someone expresses pain, my obligation is to dignify it. And you don't think of it as an obligation. It's just a default that you will reach for fulfilling what other people want, like a lot of like acts of service, a lot of all that stuff.
Yes. Now, and I would say, as a mother, right, that really resonates with me is, well, one, growing up with a Filipino mom and seeing her being so sacrificial in her giving, right? It's always about taking care of others, and sort of taking on those traits for myself is giving, and never really recognizing, how am I feeling in this moment? It's sort of like, I can think about myself later. So exactly. that is interesting.
So not checking in basically. And so with introverted thinking, you'll be very convicted as to how you see the world in terms so extroverted thinking, introverted feeling is not about like conviction, how you see the world, it's conviction in what you feel. People with those functions tend to be like, I just feel that way. Introverted thinking is like, I just think that that's not right. Like it's kind of like a little more like your standard of truth exists in a vacuum. So what you believe to be the right thing to do, like to make sure you're doing, is to be a good person, to do the right things. And so like having to reframe sometimes that like, like even if you are a rude person to someone, you can still be considered like good, even though you were mean. Like these kinds of flexible things are a little harder for someone with extrovert thinking or extroverted feeling and introverted thinking. It'll be more so, it's like, I get the feeling, but why does the action have to represent this? And someone with introverted feeling, extrovert thinking might be like, the feeling is valid regardless or something. So there's just these really opposing ways to experience reality, because for someone with introverted feeling, what is more salient to them is how they feel, versus for someone with extrovert feeling, introvert thinking, what they think, what their opinion of how to behave and how to do things is much more salient to them. So it's kind of like, almost like the person with introverted thinking wants to uphold their values in their actions. And if they aren't acting in a certain way, how can people even know what they feel? And someone with extrovert thinking and introvert feeling is like, I gotta say all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. Otherwise people won't even know what I think. And so for them, it's more about like, but do I experience like this constant sort of understanding of my ethics? It's like a little different, but they are basically able to be empathetic in opposite ways, because for someone with extroverted feeling, you'll always want to make sure that you're putting your empathy to use. And if you don't know the right thing to do, it's like, why would I just say why would I just say what I feel?
Oh my goodness.
It's not going to add to it. So yeah.
It's like you're reading my mind. Yes, there have been many times where I've recognized that if I couldn't connect in that way, that why would I just say some platitude? Because
exactly, yeah. You want to add to the conversation.
Yes.
And if you're not adding to the conversation, then why would you do anything?
Yes.
And sometimes if like you basically have to do something to avoid looking like you don't care or something, it is so just, but I don't know if that's the correct thing, and I just have the heebs-jeebs right now, and so that can be very fucking hard for
it's okay. It's okay. No, I think, I mean, just having this discussion, right? It's like I'm looking at the part about being able to access your higher self, right? It's through understanding how I can sort of relate and respond, allows me to like, oh, that's why it was so hard back in the 80s or the 90s or in that conversation last week, because I wasn't perhaps respecting, right? Like my natural tendency, and I was trying to flex in a way that was uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I would say that a lot of it is society. Society wants us to be more efficient. They want us to just do things without necessarily always going deep into like, does this match my personal truth? I'd say that for someone with extroverted feeling and introverted thinking, their personal truth is what really matters. Like, how am I going to show up regardless of the circumstances? And so when you see people who don't seem to abide by a personal truth that seems to be a little more inconsistent, it's actually because they're abiding by their inner convictions with their feelings. This is like, no matter what changes, I'm always going to feel this way about this issue. So it's like basically inner truth versus like inner emotion. And it's like very constant. So, you know, people, when they come face to face with this, I might see someone who has a convicted inner truth and be like, you're just really stubborn and really closed-minded. They might look at me and be like, you're just really emotional and really irrational. And it's like, you know, so then what do? You have to use the theory to be like, well, maybe they're actually not being closed-minded. Maybe they're just resonating with their inner truth. And because I use introverted feeling, I don't by default use my introverted thinking and have my inner truth. Therefore, I cannot understand when people are just like so stubborn about how they're going to do things, how they're going to see things. I'm like, I always just kind of change it up based on how I feel that day. And so it's like,
and in a way, it can invite us to understand, like, if we see someone feel as if someone's being stubborn, kind of look back at ourselves and say, how am I not expressing this in a way? I'm expressing it for me. So how can I express it that they can understand? And so Beth had a question. Were we discussing INFJ when we were talking about introverted thinking, extroverted feeling?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So okay, actually, because we were only discussing the judging pairs, I was talking about FJs and TPs with the extroverted feeling, introverted thinking. So you could be like an you could be an ESFJ, ISFJ, ENFJ, INFJ, ENTP, INTP, ESTP, ISTP.
Gotcha.
So what we really only did was we divided it in half.
Versus the 16, right?
Yeah, so I just told you, so basically, 8 of the types have the extroverted feeling and introverted thinking. So
Okay.
that is 8 possibilities. You,
Gotcha.
if you're an INFJ, use that. And I, as an ENFP, don't use that. So yeah.
Okay. So Beth,
hopefully
in
that
response
helps
to your
the person.
question, sort of, but not specifically. So there,
it's like, so if you are an INFJ, yes, you use that, but just because you use that doesn't mean you're an INFJ.
correct.
We haven't gotten to it yet. So yeah.
Okay. So
Sorry.
we've talked about 8. She said FJ's got it. I was identifying with much of the discussion. So Beth, are you an INFJ? Because I am an INFJ, or I have.
She
I
could be
have.
an INFJ or an ISFJ, or
right.
Yeah, like
she
I
could
think
even be extroverted, right?
She could be an ESFJ or an ENFJ. We don't know yet. So what I will say actually is, because this discussion is going very long, I want to address actually that I've met a lot of moms, and I don't want to stereotype because there are all sorts of moms, all sorts of personality types, but I think a lot of moms who are very curious about this, from my experience, have a lot of extroverted feeling and are kind of like, I don't know how to get back into a career because like all I've known is like really showing up for the people I love, and now the people I love are like maybe sometimes like off to college or like in
my gosh, yes. I've heard a lot of conversations about moms, specifically empty nest moms, extroverted feeling of, oh, who am I? What am I going to do now? My kids are gone.
It's like, it's funny because I am like a kid of an FJ mom. I'm 25, which is why I look very young, guys. But so, and the one thing I tell all these FJs, because I do talk to a lot of FJs actually who are like by coincidence, like empty nester moms, because I find them in my community just coming after. They're like, hi, I want to learn more about the world. Ooh, this is interesting. And then they come and I'm like, oh, hi. And so what ends up happening is the actual tool for self-growth, if you are an FJ mom, whether you're an INFJ, ENFJ, ESFJ, ISFJ mom, we're just going to talk about that. If you resonate with that, you have to learn to give to yourself. Yes. And that is so effing scary because
it's scary, it's hard, it's a complete different orientation to how you were sometimes brought up and how you have existed, right? Is that my role is to be the giver, the caretaker of everyone, and then to not have anyone
to give to.
You're like, oh my gosh, I don't have a reason to exist anymore, when in fact you do, right? And it is starting with yourself.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
What I really want to emphasize then, to any FJ moms watching, I feel like really guilty because if you're not an FJ mom, I'm sorry. I promise I'll be back to talk about
yes,
guys.
She will be back.
I'm just so stressed right now. I'm like, I'm sorry. We were just talking right now to FJ moms. I think that a big thing I really want to emphasize is that you are just as worthy of being given to by yourself as your children, as your spouse, as your family, as your community, neighborhood, coworkers, whatever. Like, I think that the biggest hero's journey for someone who has extroverted feeling and introverted thinking is to really get clear on realizing how freaking smart you are up here. And I think that when you really hone into your inner values and what has made you strong enough to literally be able to keep giving when some people are like, I don't want to give anymore. And you're like, I think that it can be negatively framed as it's a duty, but it's also like if you weren't built for that sort of duty to be this kind of giver, you wouldn't have been able to keep doing it and have joy out of it. So now I think what's really hard is coming back and looking at yourself as someone to give to be like walking outside in nature and be like, I'm giving myself this gift of walking and appreciating how my body is doing, like that kind of like strange mindfulness of viewing yourself as being given to and learning the art of receiving. I think this is the biggest hero's journey for an FJ. Well, not just a mom, but just any FJ human, I guess.
Right.
Really seeing yourself as someone worthy of receiving things. Like,
Beautiful.
Not feeling guilty like that you're giving. You don't have to basically tie giving to your identity, because just by breathing and existing, you're giving. Okay, I'm not a scientist. So I wish I could have landed this better, but you're giving oxygen to plants.
No, yes,
I think
no,
some
absolutely.
of you know what I mean.
I would say it's the concept of putting your own oxygen mask first on a plane and then turning and putting the oxygen mask on your kids. Beautiful.
Yeah, because you're contributing when you are taking care of yourself as a body to then give back to society and give back. Like just by taking up the space, you're actually occupying a very important part of the collective and giving. By actually doing less sometimes, you're actually giving back more because you have more energy to be present for the times you are with people. So I think it's this idea of like learning to sit with and give to yourself just by being with her. Because I think that when you give and give to others and then you sit down, you realize that there's like, you know, your own like maybe inner child of you that you have to parent and take care of who's lonely and scared. You have to figure out how to communicate with that. And it's like, whoa, this is hard. And so I think that that's why when we opened with how, for me, as an introverted feeler, I know I don't have any kids and I'm young, but like what I have learned, because there are people older than me who are people with introverted feeling, I always have put myself first in a sense, at the cost of sometimes seeming very selfish. But when push comes to shove, I understand where my emotions are coming from and they rarely surprise me. And I have learned just from being like just living on my own to kind of understand when to give to people when my cup is full and when I can't give to people because my cup isn't full, I've been paying attention, how to fill it back up and sometimes bring other people in to help them fill it up. So, yeah.
Right. All right. So with the time remaining, I was wondering if we could do the other 8 of introverted,
the perceiving
and sensing.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah.
The
it's the intuition and sensing.
Oh, intuition and sensing. Yes.
Yeah. So the ones we just did were the judging ones because they were thinking and feeling.
Got you. So this is perceiving.
So it's very confusing. Yes. So So if you are an INFJ, you use introverted intuition and extroverted sensing. So introverted intuition is kind of like this linear archive of every single impression or theme of life that you've internalized. You kind of have seen life as like a flow that you followed. Sometimes you just get the strong gut instinct, see synchronicities, just have a lot of insights into what is the point of life? What is the function of things? It even can come down to like the function of using this table is so we can have something to like write things on. Everything must have a function and an intention and a place. Yes. On the other hand, you might also use extroverted sensing where, because you see something like, this is a brick, but what are bricks used for, blah, blah, blah. Like, you can connect all of these things with meaning, with synchronicity, with just imbibing them as like part of your outer world. The extrovert sensing is kind of the absolute, like, I am here, but I am here when you unpack it. It's like all these like really freaking interesting concepts. Like, it reminds me of how you see a grassy lawn and you're like, that's the lawn, that's the extroverted sensing. But when you duck down and you see all the bugs and all the dirt, all the stuff happening, that's where all the intuition is. You're like, whoa. So
it's as if you're in my mind when I go out into nature, that I do sense far more than perhaps what my eye sees, right? I can see the interconnectedness of everything.
Exactly. And putting it into words may be really hard. Like, it's like, if
people look at me like I'm crazy.
Exactly. If someone would ask you, you're like, like, but then at the same
don't
time,
you see it?
You know, yeah, exactly. A lot of NFJs like, don't you see it? People are like, see what? And other NFJs like, I see it. And you're, yeah. And then people are like, I don't know what they're on.
Exactly. So on the flip side, right? So what is extroverted intuition with introverted sensing?
So for me, like, I kind of walk around life and I think everything is highly subjective and I don't trust my own eyes. I've joked before, sometimes I feel like I could see better if I were blind. And people are like, what does that even mean? I'm like, ha 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 ha. So it's kind of this idea that like at all times I'm sitting here and I'm like, I don't even know if this is real. Like, I can sometimes like, if a cup like falls over and spills, I can actually not even notice and be like, oh, how interesting how that just happened. Like, very like numb sometimes to like how reality is in the present. So I'm very good at idea generation, but it's very fragmented sometimes. So I can like basically talk and like people are like can kind of be like, what's your point exactly? Because I'm just commenting on all these different aspects of like facets of reality. So in INFJ, introverted intuition, it goes deep, 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 deep. Let's unpack this concept. I'm like, here's one part of the concept. Here's another part. Here's another part. Here's another part. And people are like, what is going on? And like, so I basically can like use very few details to paint a picture, a conspiracy theory. I'm excellent at creating one out of thin air.
Okay.
Like, you know, I'll like, for example, if someone says like, oh, like, I don't know what that means. And I'll sometimes joke like, do we even know what anything means? And just completely like take it off topic or something. Like it's not very fixed. Like to me, like I'm the kind of person where I can sit here and if someone says, do you ever feel, I'll start singing a lyric like a plastic bag. Like my brain is just very much like attuned to just meaning. I can hear all these different interpretations of reality going on in my head at once that I've heard before. And it's all connected to a linear archive of every single subjective experience. Like I have one of those memories where I can play back stuff like a video reel. Like I can be like, oh, like let's see. So it's like basically I can recall word for word conversation, but I have no idea what it meant. I do not remember the vibe. I don't remember those things. Like I don't know, like when I've dated boys, I've been like, I think he likes me, but maybe I'm just imagining it. Maybe I just imagined everything. I don't even know, man. Like, you know, like I can literally kind of trick myself very easily.
And is that because of the extroverted intuition, or is that the introverted sensing?
It's actually like both, but more so because I lead with extroverted intuition.
Okay.
So it means, yes. So it basically, because my intuition is extroverted, like, okay, actually, this is a good analogy. Think about how with your feelings, sometimes you'll be so focused on like giving to other people that you're not tuning into what you feel.
Okay.
I will be so focused on looking at all the possibilities of what could be happening right now, as opposed to thinking about what I think could be happening next or is in this moment being present. So I'll just be too distracted by all the intuition and all the meanings that everyone else is thinking about to think about what I believe. What do I believe? I don't know. I'm too busy thinking about what y'all believe. I can like transmute that.
What would you offer then for, trying to think here, what would you offer then for a mom that has a son or family member that is the opposite? Say, I mean, either or, right? Whether it's extroverted intuition or introverted intuition, what is a way to start to be able to relate in a way to recognize, oh, they're thinking of all these possibilities versus, or they are, the extroverted sensing, right? Over giving.
Yeah. So, well, I think that the biggest thing we can do before we just learn all this stuff and then like scientifically dissect it or spiritually dissect it is to ask a lot of questions. Like, what do you think that means, honey? Is a big question that I feel seen by. And I think someone who's like an INFJ or just even sensors, everyone can resonate with what do you think that means? Or what is your, like, I think that just trying to engage with that, like kind of like, I think like also like these tactics I've seen in therapy are actually very good at speaking to all the types. So I think sometimes with communication, I try to mirror the script of what I feel like is going on is XYZ. Is that correct though? Or what I'm hearing is XYZ. Is that correct though? So I think it's kind of this idea of like with your child especially, you have the power, unfortunately. And fortunately, as a parent, you have a lot of power over their kids. And what I think kids actually really want as a love language that is highly underrated is to be curious about or be or to have their parent find them interesting. Find and be curious about them. I realize saying be curious about is weird. But I think that
to find them interesting. And I guess I would also add, not just for our kids, but for anyone, that if we take on a role of curiosity with everyone we meet, right? So like going back to what's happening on in this world, right? Being curious on someone's individual stance or perspective in order to gain insight.
Yes. Because, and I think sometimes when we're emotional, it can be a little hard to maintain the curiosity, mindset. But I think that having the intention of trying to like find the best way to be curious, even if sometimes it feels like, oh, it backfired, or oh, it didn't like work the way I wanted it to. I think that fostering an attitude of curiosity leads to more accurate compassion as well. And I think that kids just honestly having their parents asking them questions about them that aren't necessarily accusatory, but just like even when you're just like not mad at each other, just being like, you know what? I don't know what my son's favorite existential meme. I don't know, like my son's favorite something is. I think that basically it reminds me of like in journalism school, like and in life, I just learned to just ask a lot of questions and be a professional listener and be a professional questioner. Like interviewing people just really made me want to know more about how they work. And I think that when you're first learning this very complex theory that just took an hour to explain, so only got through maybe 10%. I think that in lieu of that, asking questions to check in with who your child even is, what their essence even is, who your peers are, who your husband, your wife, whoever is. I think asking those kinds of questions just gets you in the mindset of being open to expanding what you already know. And I think that when you get into that flow of being creative, you also might feel a little less lonely sometimes if you are like an empty nesting mama, because if you're just maximizing the time with other people to ask more questions, it fills your cup more than you realize.
Yes. So, having a more meaningful conversation when you have them. And so the number one question we should be asking ourselves and others is, again, what was that question again? I think it was, do I understand? Is this what you're feeling? Or is this what you mean? Right? Just getting clarification on meaning.
Yeah. So it's like, I think I'm experiencing you like this. Is that accurate? Like what I'm hearing is this. Is that accurate? Or like what I think I'm seeing is this. It's kind of this idea of like having humility about your assumptions, but also having the confidence to just go and check them. And granted, people might be like, why are you asking me like that? That's weird. Or like people might be like, why are you asking me like that? That's like, it's just, but I think over time, the point of doing this is for you to get in the mindset of catching more things in your perception and your judgments. And I think that it just creates more accurate dialogue, because maybe your loved one will reveal something that you didn't even know was true about them until you asked. And I think
beautiful. So I just put that in the chat, having humility about your assumptions and just checking in with it. Beautiful. Yeah. So as we are coming to a close, I wanted to go back to, you were going to share a little bit of how to use tarot or your mode of higher self-reflection to journal about issues. What is a little tidbit you'd offer there?
Well, I think that if someone were to use tarot to journal, again, this is checking in with the questions you have about your reality. So this is about you and you, not about you and other people. We talk about the functions of other people. We gotta talk about you and you. So for me, when I start my day, I pull a card and I go, what does this mean? And then I have pentacles. I gotta Google that to look it up. Because again, I have been professionally reading like for 5-6 years, but like if you are just starting, Google is still your friend. You can self-teach. So you look up what is Knight of Pentacles, and it talks about like, it's about sensory, like sort of like investing slowly, XYZ. Like you read the description, then what you should do is you should journal and you should think about, what does that concept mean to me? What does it mean for me to be like persevering in the sensing? So we just talked, Wanda, about the fact that there's thinking, there's feeling, there's sensing, intuition. With the tarot, there are also 4 suits, like in playing cards, but they actually also correlate to sensing, intuition, thinking, and feeling.
Right.
So that's really trippy. And if you Google, you'll see what the correlations are. I'll tell you right now that it's cups are feelings, swords are thoughts, pentacles, which is the medieval currency, is sensing, and wands is intuition. And so in each of these cards, and we'll probably go over this in the future, but basically each of these suits has a different journey. So whenever you pull a card, it can prompt you to reflect on what the concept of that card means to you, because all 78 of those cards has a hero's journey, and that reflects something about your psyche. And we can talk more about that's a whole different discussion. But I do think that as a starting point, building off the theme of what we were discussing, it is all about questioning your reality, but having the confidence to solidify it. And I think tarot is a way to give you the prompts to even question that reality. Like if I pull the death card, it's about transformation, not about me dying. It's about my ego dying to itself. So then I got to think about, what am I unwilling to let go of? What part of me am I unwilling to let die? Like my bad temper. Why do I want to hold on to that? Do I want to hold on to that? Oh, because I think it makes me badass. Oh, well, what about being bad? You know what I mean? Like it's like,
yes,
you got to go deeper. So it's like you just feel a lot about your attachment.
So just to sort of summarize the journey that we just went on this past hour is diving into the psychic functions of MBTI, right? So a way to not only understand ourselves, but others, but then just in this brief few minutes here, how we can use tarot, which is also parallel in the functions, to understanding ourselves and going deep within through reflection, journaling, and accessing our higher self. I absolutely love this. And yes, if you cannot tell already, we already are in discussions of another Soul Speak to dive deeper, to dive deeper into more about our higher selves and tarot. So with that, I want to say thank you, Crystal. Do you have any last parting words to share with everyone?
I do not for now, but if anyone wants to contact me, I'll drop my handle on Instagram. You can always message me. I do tarot readings where I can go more in depth about like your type if you have any questions. So feel free to reach out. Awesome. And yeah, like I'm always available on Instagram, and I guess you can message me on Facebook too, because I am in the group. So yeah.
Fantastic. Yay. I'm so glad you were here for the first Soul Speak. Yes.
Yay. Okay, great. Well, I'll talk to you guys soon. Wanda, bye.
Bye.